raccoon in there, possibly going up there. Any other guesses?
Porcupine.
Yeah, that's a pretty typical porcupine trail. Generally, I don't find as obvious raccoon trails like that coming up trees. Porcupines tend to hit up the same tree over and over again for a while. They've got really big, long, crooked claws that they use to climb up them. So that's a pretty typical looking porcupine trail, kicking up the tree there and winding around. You'll find it on all kinds of the cedars in there. Some of the porcupine browse. So these are, if you look up here, you can see all kinds of branches that have been clipped up, and it's kind of neat. You look up here, you can see ones that have been cut by humans again as well. But there's also lots of tiny ones up in here, and you know that they're porcupine too because you can find them all off the backside of the tree where they wouldn't be browsing. And you're getting more of the 45s, but the porcupine 45s are a lot messier than the snowshoe hare 45s when they come down there. They've got bigger buck teeth. So all through here, you're going to find piles of porcupine browse, and they're dropped branches all back in behind the tree there. There's actually a ton along the road there. We found some really great porcupine browsing trees up along the road.
So the porcupines, I figured that they would eat the tips, or they don't eat the tips because that's...
They're going up there, so they'll go up and they'll mow on the ends up there, and then they'll often clip off branches, and they'll just
okay,
fall
so they're
off
eating
and
kind of
come
the
down
middle
there.
part.
Yeah, if you well, no. If you look at, so that's where it got nipped off. There's
Right.
the tip right there that's been taken
Oh,
off the
okay.
very end of it. Yeah.
So it just falls to the ground once they're done.
Yeah, they tend to drop these big pieces. You'll find this pretty common. You'll be walking around the forest and you'll find a big pile of cedar laying on the ground under the trees there.
Oh.
Yeah, and they're nipping the tips. They're nipping in on the green layers there.
Okay, yeah.
And then I think what happens sometimes too is a branch will be out too far and they're not able to reach out for it, and they'll just tip it and hit it on the ground, and then they'll come hit it up on the ground afterwards
Oh,
to eat
okay.
as well. You get that, red squirrels will do that too. They'll drop little branches off the ground and then they'll come down to the ground and nibble on them on the ground as well. And then the other piece that really adds to our evidence of this, so we've got the trail coming up there, we've got the browse, and then we've also got a nice juicy pile of porcupine scat here too. And let's take a look at this one. Porcupine scat, oh, perfect. That's beautiful. Oh, yeah. I like that.
Oh,
Right.
yeah.
So we got everywhere. Yeah. It's all over here, but we've got a porcupine scat right next to, who's beside me there?
Rabbit.
Yeah, cottontail scat right there. So typical ones, cottontail, porcupine, deer are all very similar in the consistency of what they're made out of, right? Because of their diet, their herbivore diet. But the cottontail and the snowshoe hares and our European hares are all these nice little round pellets. The porcupine you could potentially mix up with a deer, but there's a few key things. Because like if I take that one there, which is still a porcupine, that's definitely in deer scat size range. But the porcupines are generally kind of, they're generally longer. Kind of a slight bow to them sometimes, not always. But the big one to look with if it was a deer scat is the deer scats tend to be flat on the one side, and then they have this little taper into a little point on the other side. I wonder if I can even, I don't know, there's a little wormy in there. I don't know if I can really, let me draw it out here for you really quick. This is a bit, so looking at porcupine scat, where we normally have kind of this oblong piece like that, sometimes a little bit of a taper, not always though, sometimes they can be pretty darn straight. Whereas the deer scat, you get the same kind of thing going on, but this side's normally rounded, and this side comes into a little slight taper like that, and do a little point there. So that's what's really typical of the deer scat versus our Lagomorph scats, which are those perfectly round scats. So pretty typical porcupine there. I guess I dropped the hair one there. But you can see on that one there, that's where you might get mixed up. Oh, could that be a deer scat? Because it's in the size, it's not as oblong, but there's no little taper on one side or the other with it.
Isn't it yellowish when it's wet? Like did you?
When it's fresh, you mean?
Yeah, when it's fresh.
When it's fresh, no, it's normally darker in color. Yeah, it's normally really, really black. And when it dries out and the moisture leaves, then it takes on that yellowish color, which is more what the natural wood fiber looks things.
Hairball?
Yeah, look at the size of that. Isn't that insane?
Oh my god.
Look at how thick that is there. So it's kind of funny, my first instinct, I walk down there and it's like, oh my god, could that really be a coyote scat? Well, no, it can't be. There's no way a coyote would let a scat out that big, right? That was the first thing that popped in my mind. And then, so what's going on here is it's a hairball that's been coughed up, right? It's gone in, it's eaten some hide, and then it's just spit it up afterwards.
From a coyote?
Yeah, from a coyote. So we've got this big, long coyote scat, and actually I don't really want to touch that. So. Isn't that something? I've never seen something quite like that before, though. Isn't that beautiful?
Can you tell what animal that is?
Well, that's why I was going to touch it. Pretty sure it's deer.
Yeah?
Yeah. So how you can tell, I'm not going to touch that one, but generally how you can tell, say looking at snowshoe hare, other than variance in color alone, looking at snowshoe hare versus deer hair, is our ungulate hair is hollow.
Okay.
So if you actually fold ungulate hair in half and kink it, there's a little air pocket in there, right? So it'll actually keep like a 90-degree kink on there, and even after you straighten it out, you'll still kind of see that kink, and you can repeat it.
Okay.
Whereas snowshoe hair or cottontail hair isn't hollow, so I can fold it over and kink it, and it'll just pop back up, and that place has completely disappeared again. So sometimes when I'm looking at scat, like I'll pull a little piece out and I'll just pop it in half if I can't tell by color alone what it is, and that'll at least give me that kind of whether it's a hair, cottontail, or ungulate hair.
Your concern in touching this is what might come out of the inside, or just touching it in general? Like if
Yeah,
you're
I
touching
just
this-
wanted to stay away from touching it in general.
So you're conscious of the point of that stick that's almost touching your hand.
I'm not being super conscious of it. No. No. In
Don't-
fact, whatever. I'm just gonna pull one off. And do it. You convinced me. Let's take a look here.
Is goat an ungulate?
Yeah. Yeah. So it retains the
Yeah,
kink. So
yeah.
that's deer hair there because it retains that kink. So which is kind of what we thought it was to begin with. Nice coaxing, Todd. You got me to touch it. Trail coming up the tree here.
So where
And
are all
we got
these
it.
porcupines?
What's that? Where are they right now?
Do they burrow underground or in the tree?
There's a good chance they could be in a tree or they could be in a cave too.
Yeah, okay.
Porcupines will burrow up in caves, and often we're actually hoping we'd find one right there. I don't know if Steve's found one yet. Very often at the end, when you're looking in caves like this, you'll find a porcupine in the latrine area, and there'll be like an exit where they crawl out the back door of the cave, and there's like a huge pile of scat. And I found mounds that are like 3 meters wide and that tall piled up with porcupine scat, and the bottom stuff is almost compost and soil now. But it's years after year after year of porcupines going to that exact same washroom scat. And I do find it pretty commonly in rocky areas like this.
You said in the streets, like they go in there just to crap. That's it.
Yeah, it's their washroom. Just like we have a washroom in our house, the porcupines have their washroom. It's normally out like a back door, so they have one door that's just a washroom door, and they don't enter or exit through that door. They have their front door, and then they've got their washroom, which is a little door out the back, and that's really typical as well. But yeah, another nice porcupine trail coming up there.
I don't even, I
So
don't think
anyone have a woodpecker guess what a woodpecker is?
affiliated.
Oh, okay, cool. Yeah, really typical pileated woodpecker. I missed that. But making these long rectangular ones is super typical of the pileated woodpecker. These really, really deep holes that are rectangular. Pileated is the woody woodpecker, the real tall one with the big red hair. Other ones, most of our other woodpeckers around here are all quite a bit smaller. When we get into like our downy and our hairy and our blackback and our three-toed are all quite different, and they make different marks.
Okay.
So if you see this, you can be pretty confident it's made by the pileated. Too big for a fox. So we're definitely looking at a coyote scat there, but seeing how twisted it is and with all the hair, actually it's kind of neat, very similar to that. Remember that little weasel scat we found? The long-tailed weasel, that first day over by the shelter there. Very similar, that twisted, long, tapered on both ends, lots of hair in it, but on a much more micro level, right? But pretty typical of like that carnivore diet. So, cool.